She stood in the doorway of her brand new matrimonial bedroom, the one with the silk sheets she'd picked herself, the one that still smelled like her wedding perfume, and watched the man she'd married 3 days ago pressed against another woman's body like marriage was just a word he'd tried on and already returned. 3 days. Her wedding ring was still tight on her finger. The confetti was probably still in her hair. And her 5-year-old daughter, Amara, was downstairs eating cereal, humming the song they'd danced to at the reception. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't throw anything, though God knows she wanted to. She did something far more dangerous. She smiled. And that smile is exactly how this whole story started, because it caught the attention of the most powerful, most terrifying, most unexpectedly tender man in the entire city. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to the beginning. Before we begin, my mum said this video cannot reach 10,000 views and 1,000 subscribers. Let's prove her wrong. Smash that like button, subscribe right now, and drop in the comments where you are watching from. Now let's get into this story. Zuri Asantewaa had a theory about life. She believed that the universe had a sense of humor. A deeply twisted, occasionally brilliant, absolutely unhinged sense of humor. And that the only way to survive it was to laugh first, cry later, and always keep your head high enough that nobody could see your chin trembling. She was 31 years old. She was Ghanaian, born in Accra, raised between her grandmother's compound and the city's loud, colorful chaos, shaped by a mother who could argue with a brick wall and win, and a father who played high-life music so loud the neighbors 3 streets over knew his entire emotional state on any given evening. She was a primary school art teacher. She made the best jollof rice outside of Ghana. She would fight anyone who disagreed. She had naturally twisted locks that fell past her shoulders, deep brown skin that caught the light like it had something to say, and eyes that were simultaneously the warmest and most dangerous eyes you'd ever seen, depending entirely on what you'd just done to deserve them. She also had Amara. Amara, who was 5 years old and already funnier than most adults Zuri knew. Amara, who had inherited Zuri's grandmother's cheekbones and her father's unfortunate ability to say completely unfiltered things at the absolute worst moments. Amara, who called strangers sir and ma'am, and also once told a supermarket cashier that her breath smelled like the inside of a forgotten lunchbox. Zuri loved that child with a ferocity that frightened her sometimes. She had not planned to get married again after Amara's father, a man so spectacularly useless he made a broken umbrella look reliable. But then Deo had come along. Deo Mensah, charming and attentive and steady in that way that made her think, maybe this one. Maybe this is the universe finally getting its act together. They dated for 2 years. He was good with Amara. He remembered Zuri's favorite flower, bird of paradise. He called her mother Ma and meant it. He proposed on a Tuesday, which should have been her first sign that something was slightly off. Who proposes on a Tuesday? But she had said yes because she was tired of being alone and because she genuinely believed she loved him and because the ring was genuinely beautiful. The wedding was on a Saturday in October. It was everything she'd wanted. Her aunties cried. Her students sent a handmade card with 67 signatures in crayon. Her mother wore a Kent cloth so spectacular it practically had its own personality. Amara was the flower girl and scattered petals with the concentration of a surgeon and the chaos of a hurricane. Zuri danced. She laughed. For 48 hours she believed she had done the right thing. On the 3rd day, a Tuesday which she would later decide was the universe's way of bookending its cruelty, she came home early from a planning meeting at school. Amara was with Zuri's cousin. The house was quiet. Too quiet, actually. She noticed that first. The specific quality of quiet that wasn't empty. The kind that had presence, the kind that was actively trying to be invisible. She set down her bag at the bottom of the stairs. She walked up slowly, not because she suspected, not consciously, but because her body knew something before her mind was willing to catch up. The bedroom door was open 2 inches. She pushed it open the rest of the way. And there was the thing that rearranges your entire understanding of the last 2 years in approximately 4 seconds. Deo. And a woman Zuri had never seen before. In Zuri's bed. Under Zuri's silk sheets. With what appeared to be a significant amount of enthusiasm. The woman noticed Zuri first and made a sound, some combination of gasp and shriek, that finally made Deo turn around. His face went through approximately 9 emotions in 3 seconds. Zuri watched them all like she was grading an exam. Recognition. Guilt. Calculation. Fear. More guilt. An ill-advised flicker of something that looked like he was going to attempt an explanation. Wisely he did not attempt the explanation. And Zuri? Zuri stood in the doorway of her brand-new matrimonial bedroom, in the house they'd moved into 4 days ago, with the boxes still half unpacked in the corner, and she felt something cold and clear and sharp move through her from her crown to the soles of her feet. Not rage. Not devastation. Clarity. She looked at Deo. She looked at the woman. She looked back at Deo. And she smiled. It was a specific kind of smile, the kind that Zuri's grandmother called the smile before the storm. The kind that made people step backward without knowing why. Don't, she said quietly when Deo opened his mouth, embarrass yourself further. She turned around. She walked back down the stairs. He picked up her bag. She walked out the front door and she sat on the front step of her brand new matrimonial home in the October afternoon sun, and she called her cousin to go pick up Amara. Then she let herself have exactly 90 seconds of falling apart. 90 seconds of hands shaking and jaw tight and eyes burning, and the specific spectacular agony of realizing that the universe had done it again. Then she wiped her face. She rolled her shoulders back. She stood up. And she started making plans. She didn't know, sitting on that step, that the man who lived directly across the street, the one whose house was somehow both the largest and the quietest on the block, the one surrounded by men in dark suits who pretended to be gardeners but held themselves like soldiers, had been watching her for the past 90 seconds. She didn't know his name yet. She didn't know what he was. She just knew that when she finally looked up and met his eyes across the street, dark, still, unreadable, something in her chest did something it absolutely had no business doing. 3 days after her wedding, with her marriage already in ash, with her whole life needing to be rebuilt from scratch again, her heart did something inconvenient. It noticed him. His name was Seo Hajun. Not that Zuri knew that yet. Right now he was simply the man, the one who had been standing at his gate with the particular stillness of someone who was used to the world arranging itself around him, who had watched a woman sit on her front step and dismantle herself in 90 seconds and then reconstruct herself like nothing had happened, and who had felt something shift in his chest that he did not have a name for and was not sure he was ready to name. Hajun was 35. Korean. Born in Seoul. Raised partly there and partly in the kind of silence that children of dangerous men learn early. He'd come to Accra, and then London, and then Chicago, and then here, to this quiet suburb that was not as quiet as it looked, through a series of decisions that had seemed logical at the time and which he now thought about mostly in terms of what they had cost him. He was, depending on who you asked, several different things. To his legitimate business associates, he was the founder and chairman of CEO Group Holdings, real estate, logistics, private equity, the kind of wealth that didn't announce itself loudly. To the people who moved in darker circles, he was something else entirely. The head of what remained of his father's organization. Restructured, refined, operated with a precision and restraint that his father had never bothered with, but which Hajun had decided early was the only way to survive long-term in a world that was always watching. To the 3 men currently pretending to trim the hedge at his gate, he was simply chairman. To himself, in the honest hours of very early morning, he was a man who had been practical for so long he'd started to forget what it felt like to want something that wasn't a strategy. He had not been expecting the woman across the street. He had moved into this neighborhood 6 months ago, chosen for its proximity to a business interest he was carefully, quietly acquiring. He had noticed the empty house across from his on day one, a professional habit cataloging surroundings, and had not given it further thought until 4 days ago when a moving truck arrived, and then 2 days after that what appeared to be wedding decorations. He had noted it the way he noted everything, without emotional involvement. And then this afternoon had happened. He had come outside to speak with Kang Min-soo, his head of security, who was currently committed to the fiction of being a groundskeeper and who did not appreciate it, and had noticed the front door of the house across the street open, and a woman walk out and sit down on the step. Something about the way she sat stopped him. Not the distress, though he could see it, could read it in the set of her shoulders and the careful stillness of her face, the way he read everything like text. It was something else. The way she was fighting it. The specific dignity of someone who was absolutely not going to collapse on a public step where anyone could see, even as everything inside her clearly wanted to. He recognized that particular war. He had fought it himself at various points in his life with varying success. He watched her, not intrusively, just present, the way you watch a flame that has no idea it's beautiful, for 90 seconds. And then she looked up. Directly at him. And he understood, in a way he had not understood anything in a very long time, that he was in trouble. She had the kind of eyes that didn't ask permission. The kind that assessed and categorized and decided things about you faster than you could manage your own first impression. He was used to being the person who did that to others. He was not used to being on the receiving end. He held her gaze for 3 seconds, longer than was entirely casual, shorter than would have been a statement, and then she looked away first, back down at her phone, and he turned and went back inside and told Minsu that whatever they'd been about to discuss could wait. Minsu, who had worked with Hejun for 11 years and knew better than most humans what his expressions meant, looked at the house across the street and then back at Hejun. "Chairman," he said carefully. "I said it can wait." Inside, Hejun poured himself a measure of whiskey he didn't particularly want and stood at the window of his study, second floor, slight angle not visible from the street, and observed because he was constitutionally incapable of doing otherwise. He watched the woman make a phone call, speaking with the kind of controlled energy that suggested she was being deliberately calm for whoever was on the other end. He watched her stand up. He watched her squareness of shoulder and the lift of her chin and the way she breathed in once deep before she stood, like she was gathering something back into herself. Then, perhaps 10 minutes later, he watched a man emerge from the house, sheepish, hastily dressed, accompanied by a woman who looked like she desperately wanted to be anywhere else, and attempt to say something to the woman on the step. The woman on the step turned and looked at him. Whatever she said, Hejun couldn't hear it, didn't try to. It lasted approximately 15 seconds. The man closed his mouth. The woman he'd brought out put more distance between herself and him. The woman on the step went back inside. The man stood there for a moment looking like someone had removed his skeleton, then got in his car and drove away. Hejun finished his whiskey. He decided, going to need to learn his new neighbor's name. Not because of strategy. Not because of proximity or business or the careful management of his surroundings. Because she had smiled in the ruins of something devastating, and it had been the most extraordinary thing he'd seen in years, and Seo Hejun, who had not wanted anything purely for itself in longer than he could accurately remember, found that he wanted to know everything about that smile. He set down his glass. "Minsu," he called. Minsu appeared in the doorway with the expression of a man bracing for something that was going to complicate his professionally uncomplicated life. "Find out about the woman across the street," Hejun said. Quietly. Respectfully. "Everything that's public record and nothing that isn't." Minsu looked at him for a long moment. "Yes, Chairman," he said. "And then, because 11 years gave a person certain privileges, should I be concerned?" Hejun looked out the window at the house across the street. "Probably," he said honestly. Zuri had a system for catastrophic life events. Step 1. Cry in the shower for exactly as long as needed. There was no judgment in the shower had seen things, the shower kept secrets. Step 2. Call her best friend Efua, who was also Ghanaian, also a survivor of spectacular romantic disasters, and who could be relied upon to say the exact correct terrible thing within the first 45 seconds of any conversation. Step 3. Cook. Not stress eating. Not emotional eating. Cooking. There was a difference. Cooking was active. Cooking was purposeful. Cooking was the act of taking raw and unformed things and making them into something nourishing, which was, when she thought about it, basically the entire project of her life. So at 7 o'clock on the evening of day 3 of her marriage, God, she was going to have to stop counting days like this. It was making her feel like a hostage. Zuri stood in her kitchen and made jollof rice from absolute scratch, and she called Efua on speaker, and she let herself be properly, thoroughly, unfiltered furious. 2 years, she said to both the tomato paste and to Efua. 2 years. I let that man eat my mother's groundnut soup at Christmas, Efua. My mother's groundnut soup. That is sacred. That is not soup you give to people you are going to betray. Who was she? Efua asked. She was eating something on the other end. Chips probably, she was always eating chips. With the comfortable solidarity of a woman who had heard this story in various forms many times and would hear it many times more if necessary. I don't know. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. I didn't want her to become real. Smart. And she was in my bed, Efua. My silk sheets. I bought those sheets. I ironed those sheets. I have never ironed anything in my life, but I ironed those sheets because I thought. She stopped. Stirred the rice harder than strictly necessary. I thought it was a new beginning. I'm coming over. You don't have to. I'm coming over. I'll bring wine. Is Amara there? She's asleep. She asked where Deo was and I said he had to travel for work and she said, again, and went back to her cartoons and I wanted to both laugh and scream. Children are wise, Efua said. She never fully trusted him anyway. She asked him once why his shoes were so clean and he didn't have a good answer. See? Wise. Zuri laughed, genuinely, helplessly, the way only Efua could make her laugh in the middle of things being terrible, and stirred her rice and let the kitchen fill with the smell of tomatoes and spices and the particular alchemy that was her grandmother's recipe living in her hands. She was perhaps too absorbed in both the cooking and the conversation to notice, initially, that someone was knocking at her front door. She noticed on the third knock. Hold on, she told Efua. Someone's at the door. At this hour? Zuri, if that's Deo coming back to explain himself, I need you to be calm. I am always calm. You are famously not calm. I am calm in constructive ways. She turned down the stove, wiped her hands and went to the front door, which had a panel of frosted glass beside it through which she could make out a shape. Tall, alone, not Deo's silhouette. She opened the door. The man from across the street stood on her front step. Close he was, well. He was a thing that happened to a person was what he was. He was tall in a way that was quiet about it, which was somehow more impactful than loud tallness. He wore a dark shirt, sleeves rolled back, and he was holding, of all things, a ceramic container covered with a cloth, and he looked very faintly, like a man who had prepared several versions of a sentence and was not entirely confident in any of them. I'm your neighbor, he said. His English was precise and lightly accented, Korean beneath it, she noted. Seo Hajun. Across the street. A brief pause. I believe this is what people do. In these situations. I wanted to be sure I was doing it correctly. Zuri stared at him. He held out the container. It's doenjang jjigae, he said. Fermented soybean stew. My housekeeper made it. She insists it addresses most problems. I'm skeptical, but she has a very good track record. Zuri looked at the container. She looked at him. She became aware that she was in her kitchen clothes with tomato paste on her forearm and her locks loosely piled on top of her head, and that she somehow didn't particularly care. Most problems, she repeated. She's optimistic. I have jollof rice on the stove. Then perhaps, he said with the careful precision of someone measuring each word, they could address the problem together. She looked at him for a long moment. Those eyes, she thought, were doing that thing again. That thing where they were absolutely still and somehow told you nothing and everything simultaneously. From her phone, still on the kitchen counter, she heard Efua say in a carrying whisper, Zuri. Who is that? Zuri stepped back from the door. Come in, she said. An Seo Hajun, the most powerful man in 3 counties and the head of an organization that governments occasionally lost sleep about, stepped into her kitchen and set his housekeeper's stew on her counter and looked around at the half-unpacked boxes and the simmering rice and the general beautiful organized chaos of Zuri Asantewa's life and felt, for reasons he could not have fully articulated, that he was somewhere he had been trying to find for a very long time. Your rice, Hajun said 20 minutes later, is extraordinary. I know, Zuri said, not looking up from serving Amara a small bowl. Amara had appeared at the kitchen door approximately 4 minutes after Hajun's arrival in her pajamas, with the unerring radar of a child who sensed something interesting was happening. She had looked at Hajun for exactly 3 seconds. Then she had said, You have a serious face. Hajun had looked at her with complete seriousness. I've been told that. My mummy has a serious face sometimes too, but hers is funnier. Amara, Zuri had said. I'm just saying what's true. Which was how Amara ended up at the kitchen table at 8:30 at night eating a small bowl of jollof rice and regarding their guest with the tranquil scrutiny of a very small immigration officer. Efua had arrived 20 minutes after that, taken one look at Hajun, taken one look at Zuri, and visibly recalibrated her entire evening. She was currently on the other side of the kitchen pretending to look for a wine glass while actually just watching everything. The doenjang jjigae, Zuri said because she was a fair woman, is also extraordinary. I'll tell my housekeeper. What's in it? Fermented soybean paste. Tofu. Zucchini. Mushroom. Various, a slight pause, additions that she considers proprietary information. Zuri looked at him over her bowl. Proprietary Jigi. Your housekeeper has business instincts. She has strong opinions about most things. I respect that enormously. Amara, who had been listening to all of this with the expression of someone taking notes, said, "Do you live in the big house?" Amara. The one with all the men standing around outside? Hajun looked at Amara with what Zuri was beginning to identify as his version of amusement. A very slight shift in his expression, almost invisible like warmth behind glass. Yes. Why are there so many men? Amara, eat your rice. I am eating my rice. I'm also asking questions. It's called multitasking. Efua made a strangled sound from across the kitchen. Hajun said calmly, "They help me with things. Like bodyguards? Something like that." Amara absorbed this. My mummy doesn't have bodyguards. No, Hajun agreed. Maybe she should. Amara looked at Zuri with the serene confidence of a 5-year-old who has arrived at a conclusion. I'll be your bodyguard, mummy. You are 5. And very fast. You are not fast, you tripped over a flat floor last Tuesday. That floor had intentions, Amara said with great dignity and went back to her rice. Hajun looked at Zuri. The corner of his mouth moved approximately 2 millimeters. Zuri felt something completely unbothered and unconnected to the catastrophe of her day stir somewhere in her chest. She looked away first. Thank you for coming over, she said, and it was genuine because it had been kind. The stew and the knocking on the door and the way he'd stood on her step looking like a man consulting an internal protocol about human decency. You didn't have to. I know, he said simply. How did you know something had happened? A brief pause. I was outside when... He chose his words carefully, when the situation resolved itself. Ah. She nodded. So you saw the whole undignified production. I saw, he said, a woman handle something very difficult with considerable grace. Zuri looked at him. He looked back. Efua, from across the kitchen, cleared her throat in a way that communicated an entire internal monologue. I'm getting a divorce, Zuri said, because she was a direct person and she didn't see the point of euphemisms. 3 days after my wedding. Which is, she laughed, short and genuinely impressive even for my life. Do you need anything? Practically speaking. A lawyer or... I have a lawyer. My aunt. She's been ready for this since the moment I told her I was engaged, which is something I'm choosing not to examine too closely. She paused. But thank you for asking practically. Most people ask how I'm feeling and I cannot do that right now, I need to be functional. Feelings later, he said. Exactly. Feelings later. Rice now. He nodded once like they'd reached an agreement. I like him, Amara announced to nobody in particular. Finish your rice, Zuri said. I'm just saying. Zuri looked at Hajun again. She couldn't seem to stop doing that, which was a problem she'd address later in the feelings portion of the program, and found him already looking at her with that still, careful attention that felt somehow different from being watched. Felt like being seen. He was not ready for that. He was absolutely not ready for that. Same time tomorrow? He said as he stood to leave 2 hours later. I believe my housekeeper is making sundabujigi. Softer. She says it's good for difficult weeks. Zuri crossed her arms and gave him the look. The one Efua called the assessment, the one that her primary school students feared, the one that said I am deciding whether you are worth my time and the jury is still deliberating. You're feeding me through my divorce, she said. I'm feeding my neighbor, he said, who also happens to make the best rice I have encountered outside of anywhere actually. Flatterer. Accurate assessor. She bit the inside of her cheek against a smile. Fine. Tomorrow. But I'm making the rice. I wouldn't have it any way else, he said. And he walked back across the street into his large, quiet house with his many men who were not gardeners, and Zuri closed her door and leaned her back against it, and Efua appeared from the kitchen with a full glass of wine and her eyebrows somewhere in her hairline. Zuri. Don't. Don't. He looked at you like. Efua, I am 3 days married and falling apart, I am not. He looked at you, Efua said with the finality of someone closing a legal argument, like you were the answer to a question he'd forgotten he was asking. Zuri said nothing. From upstairs Amara called, Mummy, I like the serious man. Can he come back? Zuri closed her eyes. Go to sleep, Amara. That's not a no. Over the following 2 weeks, they established what were definitely not dates. The not dates had a rhythm. Evening, usually, after Zuri was back from school and Amara was doing homework or exhausted from various 5-year-old pursuits, and after whatever Hajun did during the day had concluded, which remained entirely unclear though Zuri noted the pattern of suited men arriving and departing at regular intervals and filed it in the category of things I'll ask about later. On Tuesdays and Thursdays Hajun came across the street. Occasionally he brought food, always his housekeeper's work, always remarkable, always presented with the slightly formal air of a man who had learned generosity through careful deliberation rather than instinct. Zuri cooked. They ate. They talked. On Wednesdays Zuri was not at home, she had after-school art club, and she came back to find twice that someone had left a packed container of food on her doorstep with no note, and she stood in her doorway looking across the street at the large quiet house and felt something she wasn't labeling. Amara, who was keeping closer track of all of this than any 5-year-old reasonably should, made a chart. Zuri discovered the chart on a Saturday morning, stuck to the refrigerator with a star-shaped magnet. It was in crayon, red mostly, and it appeared to be a calendar of some kind, with small drawings of bowls of food on certain days and what appeared to be stick figures with varying facial expressions. One stick figure had distinctive locks. One had what Amara had clearly intended as East Asian features. Both figures appeared on most days to be smiling. On day 3 of the chart, Zuri counted helplessly, both figures had hearts drawn above their heads. Amara, Zuri said to the child currently eating cereal at the table and radiating innocence like a professional, "What is this?" "It's a tracker," Amara said. "A tracker of what?" "Of things." "What things?" Amara looked at the chart. Looked at Zuri. "Important things." Zuri took the chart off the refrigerator. Amara said, "I made a copy." Zuri put her head in her hands. The not dates, in Zuri's private accounting, were doing something to her that she was trying very hard to be sensible about. Hajun he was a specific kind of person was the thing. He was quiet in a way that was full rather than empty. He listened like he meant it. He asked questions that were careful and specific, not the generic questions people asked to appear interested, but the questions of someone who had actually processed what you'd said previously and wanted to know more. He was also, and she was aware that this was inconvenient information, extraordinarily attractive in a way she was doing her level best to be mature and recently devastated woman about. He made her laugh, which was the thing she least expected. Not with jokes exactly, he wasn't a joke person, there was nothing performative about his humor, but with timing. The perfectly placed dry observation. The deadpan. The exact moment he would say the thing that reframed everything as absurd, and she'd find herself genuinely laughing and he would look at her like her laugh was something he was storing. On the Thursday of the second week they were sitting on her back step. She'd started letting him into the house freely, which she noted and then chose not to think about too hard, watching Amara conduct what appeared to be a diplomatic negotiation with a hedgehog that had appeared in the garden, and Zuri said, looking at her daughter rather than at him, "Can I ask you something real?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "What do you actually do?" "Not the official version. The actual version." Pause. She felt him beside her, very still the way he got when he was deciding something. "I run several businesses," he said, "some of which are entirely legal. And the rest are complicated. Are you dangerous?" Another pause. Longer. "To some people," he said, "yes." She nodded slowly, looking at Amara, who had apparently concluded the hedgehog negotiation unsuccessfully and was now crouching 2 feet away from it with the patience of a child who had time. "Are you dangerous to me?" Zuri asked. The pause before his answer was the shortest of all. "No," he said. Something different in his voice, quieter, more certain than any other thing he'd said. "Never." She looked at him then. He was already looking at her. "Okay," she said. "Okay. I believe you." She looked back at Amara. "I'm not asking you to be uncomplicated. I'm asking you to be honest." "I can do that." "Good." She leaned back on her hands. "Then I should tell you that my aunt, who is also my lawyer, says my divorce will be final in 6 weeks. "I know," he said. She looked at him sharply. He looked completely unruffled. "Your neighbor situation involves a man who is making the process difficult. I may have had someone speak to his lawyer about expediting." Zuri stared at him. "You," she stopped. "Hajun. You cannot just. I can, as it turns out. That is, I didn't ask you to do that. No. You didn't. He looked at her, level and unapologetic. You also didn't need to. She breathed in. Breathed out. I need to be angry about this, she said. I understand. I am angry about this. Okay. It is not okay for you to, she made a gesture, mobilize on my behalf without asking me. You're right, he said. I should have asked. I won't do it again without asking. She looked at him. He looked back. He meant it, she could tell. No defensiveness. No negotiation. Just acknowledgement. It was, she found, genuinely infuriating that he was good at this. 6 weeks, she said. 6 weeks, he agreed. And they sat on her back step in the October evening and watched Amara, who had been gradually edging closer to the hedgehog with geological patience, finally close the last foot of distance and rest her small hand beside it, very still, waiting. The hedgehog investigated her fingers. Oh, Amara breathed, delighted. Zuri smiled at her daughter. She felt Hajun watching her smile. She let him. Not dates, she thought. Sure. The thing about Kang Minsu was that he had, over 11 years of service, developed certain categories for the events of his professional life. Category 1. Expected. Normal operations. Predictable. Category 2. Professionally inconvenient. Situations requiring management. Category 3. Personally alarming. Reserved for the approximately 3 times per decade when Seo Hajun, the most controlled and strategically minded man Minsu had ever worked for, did something that suggested emotion was involved in the decision-making process. Minsu was currently operating in Category 3. He had identified the symptoms early and tried to address them through pointed neutrality, but pointed neutrality was not working. Symptom 1. The chairman had begun leaving his house in the evenings without security notification. When questioned, he had said he was crossing the street, which was technically true, and which Minsu found approximately as comforting as being told the building was only slightly on fire. Symptom 2. The chairman had on 3 separate occasions redirected calls from significant business contacts because he was unavailable, and each time he had been unavailable because he was across the street eating rice with a Ghanaian primary school teacher and her 5-year-old daughter who had asked Minsu, the one time she'd encountered him, whether he ever smiled and if not why. Symptom 3. And this was the one that had moved the situation firmly into Category 3. The chairman had instructed Minsu to ensure that the matter of the neighbor's divorce was expedited, which meant Minsu had spent an afternoon on a phone call with a Seoul lawyer and a Chicago fixer and a very confused Ghanaian attorney, all of whom had received the clear message that things should move along without being explicitly told why. Minsu had done it. Obviously. He did everything. He had also spent considerable time since then assessing risk, which was his job. The risk assessment for Seo Hajun becoming involved with a woman, any woman, but particularly a recently separated from the worst timing in history woman with a small child and strong opinions about rice, was significant. There were people who would use Hajun's attachments against him. There were arrangements, ongoing, that complicated personal involvement. There was a situation in Seoul that remained unresolved and which could become very relevant very quickly if anyone with a grievance decided to exploit a vulnerability. A woman Hajun looked at the way he looked at Surya Santua was a vulnerability. Minsu knew this. He suspected Hajun knew this too and was choosing, for the first time in recent memory, to proceed despite knowing. He was, against his better professional judgment, finding it difficult to object. He had watched the chairman across 11 years become gradually less and less present in any human sense. Efficient. Precise. Effective. But increasingly like a man who had decided that operating at a slight remove from his own life was the safest option, and who had gotten very good at it. And then across the street had come a woman who cooked rice from scratch and laughed like she meant it and had a daughter who negotiated with hedgehogs. And the chairman had crossed the street with his housekeeper's stew and come back looking like something had shifted in him that 11 years of careful distance hadn't been able to shift. So Minsu did his job. He managed the risk with the tools available. He had quietly put additional protections in place around the house across the street. Casual, invisible, nothing alarming. He had run a full check on the situation with the ex-husband and satisfied himself that the man was pathetic rather than dangerous. He had flagged the Seoul situation for closer monitoring. And he had said nothing. He was saying nothing the evening that the chairman came back from across the street looking like a man who had decided something. The specific expression Hajun got when he'd made a strategic decision, except this time it wasn't about strategy. She knows, Hajun said by way of greeting. Toes what? That I'm not simply a businessman. Minsu was quiet for a moment. How did she respond? She asked if she should be afraid. And Hajun poured himself water. She said she believed me. Then she told me to ask before acting on her behalf. Pause. She was right. Minsu regarded his employer for a long moment. Chairman. I know. The Seoul situation. I know, Minsu. Chairwoman Park has been making inquiries about. I know. Hajun set down his glass. He was looking out the window, not at the house across the street, up at the sky. I'm not being reckless. I didn't say. You were thinking it. Minsu had the grace to not deny this. She has a child, Hajun said quietly. Yes. She's been hurt. By someone who wasn't honest with her. Yes. I'm not doing that. It was flat certain, the way Hajun was certain about things that weren't negotiable. Whatever happens or doesn't happen, I'm not doing that. He knows what I am. Approximately. She'll know more when she needs to. Minsu was quiet. The Seoul situation, Hajun said, needs to be resolved. I want it handled by the end of the month. Cleanly. That's aggressive. I know. Make it happen. He turned from the window. And Minsu. Chairman. The woman across the street and her daughter. They're a priority. Not a standard one. Minsu understood exactly what that meant. He nodded. One more thing, Hajun said. Minsu waited. Her birthday is in 3 weeks. I'd like to take her somewhere she hasn't been. I'll need recommendations. Minsu looked at the man he'd worked for 11 years. This careful, controlled, strategic person, standing in his kitchen asking for birthday dinner recommendations. I'll put together a list, he said. Thank you. Minsu walked to the door. He paused. Chairman, he said, because 11 years gave a person certain privileges, for what it's worth. He paused. She looks at you too. He left before Hajun could respond. Zuri had not intended to tell him her birthday. It had come up by accident. Amara had mentioned it with the unbothered candor of a child who did not understand social strategy, during one of their evenings saying, Mummy's birthday is soon and I want to get her a hedgehog, but she said no. And then looking at Hajun like she was filing an appeal with a higher authority. Hajun had looked at Zuri. Zuri had looked at Amara with the look. Amara had continued eating soup. So when 2 weeks later Hajun knocked on her door on a Saturday evening while Amara was at a sleepover at Efua's and said, I'd like to take you somewhere, Zuri had approximately 37 competing responses available to her and stood in her doorway cycling through them at speed. Take me where? She asked. A restaurant. He paused. For your birthday. My birthday is not. It is actually. I checked. Pause. I'm aware that's slightly alarming. Slightly. I know people. I have gathered that. She looked at him, dark shirt again, different from the others though cut the same, something understated about the way he dressed that she was learning to read as intentional. He was watching her with that careful attention that she had stopped trying to be unaffected by because it was exhausting. She thought about Efua who had spent 3 of their last 4 phone calls saying some variation of Zuri. You like him, stop making it complicated, it's already complicated, embrace the complicated. She thought about her divorce, which was moving with unusual efficiency through channels and would be finalized in less than 3 weeks. She thought about the fact that she had spent 23 of the last 27 evenings finding reasons to be home, and had not once been bored by it. Give me 20 minutes, she said. The restaurant was not what she was expecting, which she later decided she should have expected, because nothing about Hajun was ever quite what she expected. It was on the roof of a building downtown. Open air, candlelit, with the city spread below them like a conversation happening at a distance they couldn't quite hear. There were flowers, bird of paradise specifically, which stopped her breath for a second because she had mentioned them exactly once in passing weeks ago and he had remembered. She looked at the flowers. Looked at him. You remembered, she said. I remember everything you say, he said simply, like it was just a fact about how he operated, and then he looked faintly alarmed at having said it with such directness and looked at the menu instead. Zuri sat down and decided that feelings could have their turn now. It was a long dinner. It was the kind of dinner that seems like 2 hours and turns out to have been 4. The kind where the food is excellent but neither of you can clearly remember what you ate because the conversation had its own gravity. They talked about Accra, her childhood there, the heat and noise and color of it, her grandmother who had kept birds and told stories that made the birds seem like participants. They talked about Seoul, his more careful, more edited but present. He'd loved it and left it, and the leaving had been complicated in ways he gave her the outline of without the detail, which she accepted because she understood that some things needed more than one dinner. They talked about Amara. He asked questions about her that were specific. Her art, the hedgehog negotiation, the crayon chart on the refrigerator that Zuri had mentioned once briefly and which he'd clearly filed. She made a copy, Zuri said. I know. Zuri looked up. How do you know? She showed it to me. Pause. Last Tuesday when you were making tea. She came and stood beside me and held it up and said, "This is my tracking system," and I said, "I see," and she said, "I have noted things," and I said, "What things?" and she said, "Things that are good." He looked at Zuri with his version of amusement, warm behind glass. She then asked me if I wanted to be officially added to the system. Zuri put her face in her hands. I said yes, he said. She looked up. You said yes. It seemed important to her. You are aware that you've just been recruited by a 5-year-old. I have significantly more sophisticated people attempt to recruit me regularly, he said. Hers was the most compelling pitch. Zuri laughed, full, genuine, helpless, and he watched her laugh with that expression, the one she was learning, the one that was quiet and full and entirely about her. After dinner, after the city below them had gone from gold to dark and the candles had burned lower, they stood at the edge of the roof looking out at everything, and Zuri said, "This year has been," she paused, looking for the right word. "A lot," he offered. "A lot," she agreed. "And I thought this birthday was going to be, I thought I'd spend it in damage control mode. Trying to figure out the next thing." She looked out at the city. "I didn't expect to feel like this." Like what? She considered him, the question, the quiet sincerity behind it. "Good," she said. "I didn't expect to feel good." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Zuri. I need to tell you something." The shift in his tone was slight, but she caught it. Careful, considered, more serious than the dinner had been. She turned to look at him fully. "There's a situation," he said. "In Seoul. Something I've been handling. It involves people who aren't happy with how I've restructured certain things. I want you to know because..." He stopped, measured his words. "Because you and Amara are important to me. And if that situation becomes relevant to people near me, I want you to know ahead of time. Not after." She held his gaze. "What does relevant mean exactly?" "It means," he said carefully, "that people who want to affect me might look for things that matter to me." He processed this. "So you're telling me I might be in danger?" "You won't be. I've made sure of that. But I wanted you to know why. Because we matter to you." "Yes." "Hajun." She kept her voice steady. "Are you telling me that you have enemies who might come after the women in your life?" "I'm telling you that I want to be honest with you." He looked at her without flinching. "And that I would never let anything happen to you." She was quiet for a long moment. She thought about Efua saying the complicated is already there, just be in it. She thought about Amara's crayon chart and the hedgehog and the bird of paradise flowers that he'd remembered from one passing mention. She thought about 90 seconds on a front step and a man standing at his gate watching her put herself back together. She reached out and touched the back of his hand, just briefly, just fingertips, just the first deliberate touch she'd allowed herself, and felt him go very still. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Okay, thank you for telling me. Okay, I'm not running." She looked up at him. "But Hajun, next time there's something I need to know? Tell me before you handle it. Not after." "Yes," he said. His hand turned over beneath hers. His fingers closed gently around hers. Neither of them moved. "We should get back," she said after a long suspended moment. "Yes," he said. Neither of them moved for another 30 seconds. Amara had known since the second week. She had known in the particular way that children know things. Not through analysis but through the body, through the feeling in rooms, through the quality of her mother's voice when certain things were said and not said. She had conducted her research. She had made her chart. She had taken her findings to the source, Hajun, on that Tuesday with her clipboard, and assessed his response and found it acceptable. She had told Efua auntie on the phone when her mother was in the shower, "I think Mummy's going to be okay." Efua auntie had made a sound that suggested she agreed. She had told the hedgehog during their ongoing negotiations that things were improving. The hedgehog had no visible opinion. She had not told her mother any of this because she was 5 and not 10, and even at 5 she understood that some things needed to arrive in their own time. But on the morning after her mother's birthday dinner, Amara had come home from Efua auntie's to find her mother in the kitchen making tea and humming, which was different from the humming of the past 3 weeks, lighter, more on purpose. She climbed onto the kitchen stool and said, "Did you have a nice birthday?" "I did," Zuri said, and the smile on her face was the one Amara put in the good column, the one that started at her eyes. "With the serious man?" "His name is Hajun." "I know his name. Did you have a nice birthday with Hajun?" "Yes." Zuri looked at her daughter. "A very nice birthday." Amara nodded. "Good. I've added you both to the system. The system is a sheet of crayon on the refrigerator. Every system starts somewhere." Amara ate her banana. "He's going to need a new entry today." "Why?" "Because he left that on the step." She pointed to the front door where, through the glass, a small package was visible on the step. Zuri looked at it. She opened the door. There was a parcel, small, wrapped in paper and tied with string, and on the string was a card with 3 words in precise, careful handwriting. "For Amara. H." Zuri brought it in. Amara took it with enormous dignity and unwrapped it to reveal a small, extremely well-made ceramic hedgehog. Amara looked at it, looked at the door, looked at her mother. "He's very good," she said. "He is," Zuri agreed. "I'm going to put this on my shelf." "Yes. Next to my important things." "Amara." "Mummy." Amara slid off the stool and picked up her hedgehog and looked at her mother with the tranquil wisdom of someone who had assessed the situation thoroughly. "It's okay to like him." Zuri looked at her daughter. Her daughter looked back. "It's already complicated," Amara said at age 5, having absorbed more from her Efua auntie's phone calls than anyone had realized, "so just be in it." Zuri opened her mouth, closed it. "Go play," she said. Amara went. Zuri stood in her kitchen and looked across the street at the large quiet house and felt, clearly and without the usual accompanying terror, that she was in something. She had made a decision. She texted Hajun. Amara got the hedgehog. 3 seconds. "I know." Minsu supervised the selection. He was very serious about it. "Did he smile?" "He says he was smiling internally." She laughed. "Hajun." "Yes. Come for dinner tonight." "Not a not date. An actual dinner. That's what I'm calling it." A longer pause this time. He watched the 3 dots. "I'll bring dessert." "Is it from your housekeeper?" "It is." "Then yes." 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock. She put her phone down and leaned against the counter and let herself feel it, the warmth of it, the terrifying, uncomplicated good of it, and thought, "This is the thing that's happening and I'm in it and it's going to be complicated and also good and I'm in it." She was smiling when Efua called. "I knew it," Efua said before Zuri could speak. "Your voice right now, Zuri, your voice is doing the thing." "Goodbye, Efua." "Don't you dare." She hung up. She was still smiling. The dinner that was officially a dinner, not a not date, an actual dinner named and acknowledged, was quieter than their previous evenings in the way that named things sometimes are. The acknowledgement of something changes its texture, makes it both more comfortable and more charged. Zuri had made kontomire stew, spinach and palm nut, her mother's recipe, the one she made for people she wanted to feed in the deeper sense, the taking care sense. She had, without announcing it to herself consciously, been thinking about making it for Hajun for 2 weeks. He brought dessert, his housekeeper's bingsu, Korean shaved ice with red bean and fruit, which Amara received as the greatest gift of the current era and immediately began eating with the dedication of a professional. The 3 of them sat at the kitchen table. Outside, October was doing its ending the year thing, that particular light, amber and low that made everything look like a memory of itself. Amara talked about the hedgehog on her shelf and the fact that she had named it Minsu Jr., in honor of someone she described as, "the man who doesn't smile but helped pick my hedgehog," which information Hajun received with complete composure and the invisible 2mm mouth shift. After Amara was in bed, worn out from Efua's, from sugar, from the comprehensive work of being 5, They sat in the living room and it was the first time they'd been alone in an interior space since the beginning, and they both felt the difference. I want to say something, Suri said. Okay. She had her legs tucked under her, sideways on the couch, facing him. He was at the other end, turned toward her, jacket off, the careful formality of him slightly, pleasantly loosened. I married someone because I was tired, she said. I want to be honest about that. I liked him. Thought I loved him. But part of it was, I was tired of being the person who does everything alone, and I thought maybe this was enough, wanting someone to be a partner. Even if the fire wasn't exactly, she made a gesture. I understand, he said. I know you do. I've noticed you understand things before I finish saying them, and it's occasionally annoying. The corner of his mouth. What I'm saying is, she looked at him, with you I don't feel tired. I feel, she paused looking for it, awake. Like I've been doing a long, careful, responsible walk, and then I looked across the street and someone said we could run instead. Hajun was very still. I know your life is complicated, she said. I know you have a soul situation and men who aren't gardeners and things you can't fully tell me yet. I'm not asking for uncomplicated. I'm asking for honest. She held his gaze. Can you do that? Yes, he said. No hesitation. And the soul situation will be handled. It's already being handled. And if it reaches us, me and Amara, you'll tell me before, not after. Yes. She nodded. He looked at her with that expression. Full, warm, the glass dissolved tonight, just the warmth directly there. Zuri, he said, and her name in his voice was specific, careful, like he was handling something he didn't want to drop. Yes, she said. I haven't. He stopped. Started again. I stopped expecting things, he said carefully. For myself. Personally. I made peace with that. It seemed logical given my life. He looked at her. And then you sat on your front step and smiled, and I crossed a street with my housekeeper's stew, and everything I'd made peace with became something I wanted to renegotiate. The room was very quiet. Renegotiate, she said. You are something, Hajun, you really are. I mean it. I know you mean it. That's the part that's... She stopped, her voice doing something she wasn't entirely in control of. He moved. Not dramatically, he wasn't a dramatic movement person, he was specific and intentional about everything, including the way he closed distance. He simply shifted down the couch until he was close, until she could see the fine detail of his face, and he looked at her with everything visible, all of it, unguarded in a way that she understood cost him something. Can I? He said. She looked at his mouth. Looked at his eyes. Yes, she said. He kissed her like she was something worth being careful with and also something worth being certain about, and she kissed him back like she'd made up her mind and wasn't changing it, and it was the specific kind of kiss that reorganizes things. The kind that ends one chapter and begins another. The kind she felt in her chest and her hands and the back of her throat, that made everything before it seem like it was pointing here. When they finally separated, Suri breathed out. Hajun rested his forehead against hers. Okay, she said softly. Oh, he agreed. And then his phone buzzed.